This is Civil War, which is a movie that is shot through the lens of basically war photographers or, well, photojournalists through a situation where the United States has become fractured and the Civil War is ongoing or, well, working towards its possible conclusion. So be sure to like the video, subscribing is great as well, and if you want to see more movie reviews, let me know. We don't get a lot of screenings these days, but luckily I was able to check this out early through Elevation Pictures in Canada, which was, really nice actually. It's been a long time since I had a screening, and if that makes any sense to you. But let's focus on the actual movie at hand. So this is a film that I think some people will be a little bit confused about, because I'm sure from a marketing perspective it's being shown as this epic battling combat sort of thing, and it is kind of along those lines, but not in the way that most people think. And this is a film that could have really used a little bit more context and exposition as to like the overall status of things. And we're going to dive into why it didn't have that, but yeah, let's first just kind of talk about things, because it was a movie where I was very confused as to what exactly the goals or motivations or why things had splintered between the United States. It is kind of like briefly talked about through like sort of side characters mentioning things, but you don't really get a full picture as to like why, what are the motivations of the groups. And I think having like a 5 minute newspaper clipping exposition kind of like clip thing at the beginning, being like, here's how we got here, would have been so helpful. And it's trying to be something that is not biased in any direction, not trying to make a message in any direction. It's very much something that is against war and conflict. That's the whole idea of the character and what she has been doing throughout the course of her career. And it's basically the lens of, again, a war photographer going in and enjoying just these moments of intensity. I say enjoying as not in the sense that, like, oh, this is fun and stuff like that. Some of those moments they did seem to get really sort of high off of. But it's more the idea of, like, this is important work. There's enjoyment in providing this sort of information to people. And why didn't the photos and stuff that I did over my career stop this sort of thing from happening, if that makes any sense to you? And it's a very much a generational film. You get some aging press, you get some press that are kind of in a little bit, I don't know if in their prime, but sort of peaking in their career, and then a younger individual as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit further in a second here. But the way that this is sort of shot is in a way that there's no specific ideologies that are supposed to be like pushed, and there's not really a building of any characters and their backstories aside from little tiny bits. So you're kind of thrown into the midst of a war where you don't know what's going on in terms of the greater picture or what's happening or why certain things are going on. And it's just a series of events that you are seeing. These small little events that have shock value. And as the film progresses and eventually gets towards this long fighting segment, you just kind of forget about the shock value because it sort of becomes sort of void, and or you just kind of numb to it at a certain point, as odd as that may sound. But you get to a point where you're sort of like, oh, there's lots of conflict, like this is crazy, but like we've seen it throughout the course of the film. So yeah, it's basically Kirsten Dunst there is this main photojournalist, and she's paired with this one guy who's like all hyped up, and the goal of the two is they want to basically capture the end of the Civil War, the money shot, the big shot. And then this young girl kind of forces her way into the group and basically is taken under the wing of this team as they try to teach her about what it takes to do this kind of work and why this kind of work is important. And that's the idea, is the message of the overall film is like, journalism is important. It paints a picture of like what's happening, and you're supposed to show it through an unbiased lens, something that doesn't specifically tell you that you should get behind this side or that side. It's just capturing it, which is a cool idea and a cool concept, but it's not necessarily something that really gets you fully into a movie, if that makes sense. Like, the concept is valid, the concept is interesting, but as I got towards the end of at least 20 something minutes straight of action at towards the end, I was just kind of left really wanting more. Like, I'm not going to spoil anything, but I was just really left by the time everything, the credits rolled and stuff. I was just kind of like, that's sort of it. I was just like, I was just wanting something more. Still, it was a tense, enjoyable ride in the sense that it was like gripping, it was crazy, it was unsettling. There was a good joke about Canadian currency being of high value, which got great laughs in the theater. There are moments of levity in the darkness, but it's very much like this really bleak road trip across a desolate America that is just plunged into chaos, and you're never specifically knowing why this is happening, and you're just kind of along for the ride, seeing those dark moments, seeing how they set up photos and moments to capture them in order to tell this story that's ongoing. And the conflict really is you seeing all of this chaos sort of build, them going into these war zones. But it is also hard to follow specifically like the factions, as to say. Like you're sometimes just seeing regular people doing regular things. And I guess that is a bit of the war story. Some people are killing other people in chaotic places just because they have to survive. Some people have other motivations, but you don't really know. And it's like this is a good performance from Dunst, I think, for like really like a good performance. But you don't really get to know these characters a whole lot. You get some context into them, but you don't really get to know them to a degree that really makes you like necessarily fully root for them or anything like that. And it was like a painfully predictable movie where literally like 15 minutes in I knew exactly what was going to happen throughout the whole story, and I was like, oh, and then when it happened I was like, yeah, I called it. And I was just like, that kind of killed it for me too. Was it really photographed where it was going and what was going to happen right off the bat, and it just like there was stakes, there was tension, there was really crazy chaotic moments where you're like, oh wow, and you just like it was just silent in the theater for some of these spots. And I think that in itself is very effective. And some of the music was weirdly out of place, I thought, at times too. And this one, like, really kind of happy music despite some crazy things going on. But it does an effective job of conveying and painting the picture of this, like, United States where everything has sort of, like, broken apart. Things got a little bit messed up due to the actions of a president. And you really are kind of there for the peak of the chaos, the peak of the end of it, and you get to see that ride. And I do think some people are going to not necessarily love this in terms of where it goes. Like, this is a really good movie for some people, but if you're expecting like an action, oh, it's a civil war, it's not really quite like that. It's almost edging on Purge like territory, but not in that sense. Like you're more just following a group that's taking photos and capturing these moments and teaching you about why it's important to capture these moments and seeing the chaos through like the lens of the press doing a chaotic war shoot. And it's an enjoyable film. It's not necessarily one I think I would revisit because I kind of got it the first time through, but it was very well shot. It painted a really dark, just chaotic, sorrowing picture of this country in disarray. These people that, like, I think especially if you're in the US, could be people that you would like resonate with and be like, oh, these situations, I get this or I get that. And it's almost turned the US into a chaos or into a crazy place that is destructive and really something you would recognize from not the US, if that makes sense. Something that you would see and photojournalists, work through in other places around the world, but it's being painted as like as part of the home front. And it is good that it doesn't necessarily dive into specific political thoughts or ideologies. And the idea is that you are really seeing it as unbiased as it possibly can be. But at the same time, in doing so, we have very shallow characters that aren't really like you don't fully get their motive. You don't really get behind them because they're just kind of like empty bodies that you're sort of just following along the way. And I think they could have more effectively built up those characters. I think they could have more effectively just, again, with like a 5-minute segment at the beginning, just being like, this caused this, that caused this, that caused this. And it's like, and these are the people that are capturing the situation. And it's like, it starts out really crazy and the whole journey is really intense and it felt really crazy and chaotic, as I keep saying that word over and over again, but that's what it felt like. But at the same time, by the end of it, I was just kind of like, oh, okay. And I think the picture it paints for people as something like whether or not you'd be interested in it is kind of making it more like an action film where it is an action movie, but it's more about something else than what you're probably expecting. So I thought that was kind of important to convey. So I really enjoyed it, but I did think that there was something missing and something more that they could have done with this, and something more that would have been intriguing and capturing for me. So I'd give this one a 7.5 out of 10. You can read my full review in the description below and everything like that. But I liked it. I wasn't necessarily blown away by it. Good performances, good acting throughout all the different characters that were kind of present. And it does paint a powerful, interesting picture. I just was sort of hoping for something more profound or something more interesting, as it was basically something I predicted, not even just like 15 minutes in. I was kind of like, oh, okay. But overall, kind of a cool movie. Something you should maybe check out for a one-time viewing, and I think some people will really like what it has to offer, whereas others will be maybe a little disappointed that the marketing doesn't show them exactly what the movie is trying to be.